Chapter 27 of Ormond by Maria Edgeworth. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Ormond had written to Monsieur and Madame de Connell to announce his intentions of spending some time in Paris, and to thank them for the invitation to their house, an invitation which, however, he declined accepting. But he requested Monsieur de Connell to secure apartments for him in some hotel near them. Upon his arrival he found everything prepared for a milord Anglois. Handsome apartments, fashionable carriage, well-powdered laquais, and a valet de chambre waited the orders of monsieur. Connell was with him a few minutes after his arrival, welcomed him to Paris with cordial gaiety, was more glad and more sorry, and said more in 5 minutes, and above all made more protestations of regard than an Englishman would make in a year. He was rejoiced, delighted, enchanted to see Mr. Ormond. Madame de Connell was absolutely transported with joy when she heard he was on his road to Paris. Madame was now at Versailles, but she would return in a few days. She would be in despair at Mr. Ormond's not accepting the apartments in the Hôtel de Connell, which were actually prepared for him, but in fact it was nearly the same thing, within 2 doors of them. He hoped Mr. Ormond liked his apartments, but in truth that was of little consequence, for he would never be in them except when he was asleep or dressing. Ormond thought the apartments quite superb, and was going to have thanked Monsieur de Connell for the trouble he had taken, but at the word superbe, Connell ran on again with French vivacity of imagination. "Certainly Mr. Ormond ought," he said, "to have everything now in the first style." He congratulated our hero on his accession of fortune, of which Madame de Connell and he had heard with inexpressible joy. And Mademoiselle Ophélie too, she who had always prophesied that they should meet in happiness at Paris, was now absolutely in ecstasy. You have no idea, in short, my dear Ormond, of what a strong impression you left on all our minds, no conception of the lively interest you always inspired." It was a lively interest which had slumbered quietly for a considerable time, but now it wakened with perfectly good grace. Ormond set little value on these sudden protestations, and his pride felt a sort of fear that it should be supposed he was deceived by them. Yet, altogether, the manner was agreeable, and Connell was essentially useful at this moment. As Sir Ulic had justly observed, a coxcomb in fashion may, in certain circumstances, be a useful friend. "But, my dear fellow," cried Connell, "what savage cut your hair last? It is a sin to trust your fine head to the barbarians. My hairdresser shall be with you in the twinkling of an eye. I will send my tailor. Allow me to choose your embroidery, and see your lace, before you decide. I am said to have a tolerable taste. The ladies say so, and they are always the best judges. The French dress will become you prodigiously, I foresee. But, just heaven, what buckles! Those must have been made before the flood. No disparagement to your taste, but what could you do better in the Black Islands? Paris is the only place for bijouterie. Except in steel, Paris surpasses the universe. Your eyes will be dazzled by the Palais Royal. But this hat, you know, it can't appear. It would destroy you. My chapelier shall be with you instantly. It will all be done in 5 minutes. You have no idea of the celerity with which you may command everything at Paris. But I am so sorry that madame is at Versailles, and that I am under a necessity of being there myself to-morrow, for the rest of this week. But I have a friend, a little abbé, who will be delighted in the meantime to show you Paris." From the moment of his arrival at Paris, Ormond resolved to put Florence Annalee completely out of his thoughts, and to drown in gaiety and dissipation the too painful recollection of her duplicity towards him. He was glad to have a few days to look about him, and to see something of Paris. He should like, as he told Monsieur de Connell, to go to the play, to accustom himself to the language. He must wear off his English or Irish awkwardness a little, before he should be presented to Madame de Connell, or appear in French society. A profusion of compliments followed from Monsieur de Connell, but Ormond persisting, it was settled that he should go incog. This night to the Théâtre François. Connell called upon him in the evening, and took him to the theatre. They were in une petite loge, where they could see without being seen. In the box with them was the young Abbé, and a pretty little French actress, Mademoiselle Adrienne. At the first coup d'œil, the French ladies did not strike him as handsome. They looked, as he said, like dolls, all eyes and rouge, as he thought, very unbecomingly put on, in one frightful red patch or plaster high upon the cheek, without any pretence to the imitation of natural colour. Fi donc, said the Abbé, what you call the natural colour, that would be rouge coquette, which no woman of quality can permit herself. No, Dieu merci, said the actress, that is for us. 'Tis very fair we should have some advantages in the competition. They have so many by birth, if not by nature. Monsieur de Connell explained to Ormond that the frightful red patch which offended his eye was the mark of a woman of quality. Women only of a certain rank have the privilege of wearing their rouge in that manner. Your eye will soon grow accustomed to it, and you will like it as a sign of rank and fashion. The actress shrugged her shoulders, said something about la belle nature and the good taste of Monsieur Langlois. The moment the curtain drew up, she told him the names of all the actors and actresses as they appeared, noting the value and celebrity of each. The play was, unfortunately for Ormond, a tragedy, and Lequin was at Versailles. Ormond thought he understood French pretty well, but he did not comprehend what was going on. The French tone of tragic declamation, so unnatural to his ear, distracted his attention so much that he could not make out the sense of what any of the actors said. "'Tis like the quality rouge," said Connell. "Your taste must be formed to it. But your eye and your ear will accommodate themselves to both. You will like it in a month." Monsieur de Connell said this was always the first feeling of foreigners. "But have patience," said he. "Go on listening, and in a night or two, perhaps in an hour or two, the sense will break in upon you all at once. You will never find yourself at a loss in society. Talk, at all events, whether you speak ill or well, talk. Don't aim at correctness, we don't expect it. Besides, as they will tell you, we like to see how a stranger play with our language." Monsieur de Connell's manner was infinitely more agreeable toward Ormond now than in former days. There was, perhaps, still at the bottom of his mind the same fund of self-conceit, but he did not take the same arrogant tone. It was the tone not of a superior to an inferior, but of a friend in a new society and a country to which he is a stranger. There was as little of the protector in his manner as possible, considering his natural presumption and acquired habits, considering that he had made his own way in Paris, and that he thought that to be the first man in a certain circle there was to be nearly the first man in the universe. The next morning the little Abbé called to pay his compliments and to offer his services. Monsieur de Connell being obliged to go to Versailles, in his absence the Abbé would be very happy, he said, to attend Mr. Ormond, and to show him Paris. He believed, he humbly said, that he had the means of showing him everything that was worth his attention. Away they drove. "Gare, gare!" cried the coachman, chasing away the droves of walkers before him. There being no footpaths in the streets of Paris, they were continually driven up close to the walls. Ormond at first shrunk at the sight of their peril and narrow escapes. "Monsieur apparemment is nervous after his voyage?" said the abbe. "No, but I am afraid the people will be run over. I will make the coachman drive more quietly." "Du tout, not at all," said the little abbe, who was of a noble family, and had all the airs of it. "Leave him to settle it with the people; they are used to it. And after all, what have they to think of but to take care of themselves? La canaille." La canaille, synonymous with the swinish multitude, an expression of contempt for which the Parisian nobility have since paid terribly dear. Ormond, who was not used to it, found it difficult to abstract his sympathy from his fellow creatures by whatever name they were called, and he could not exclusively command his attention to admire the houses and churches which his abbe continually pointed out to his notice. He admired, however, the fine façade of the Louvre, the Place de Louis XV., the astonishingly brilliant spectacle of the Palais Royal, Notre Dame, a few handsome bridges, and the drives on the boulevards. But in fact there was at that time much more to be heard and less to be seen than at present in Paris. Paris was not then as fine a city as it now is. Ormond in his secret soul preferred the Bay of Dublin to all he then saw on the banks of the Seine. The little abbe was not satisfied with the paucity of his exclamations, and would have given him up as un froid Anglois, but that, fortunately, our young hero had each night an opportunity of redeeming his credit. They went to the play. He saw French comedy. He saw and heard Molière and Madame de la Rouette. The abbe was charmed with his delight, his enthusiasm, his genuine enjoyment of high comedy, and his quick feeling of dramatic excellence. It was indeed perfection, beyond anything of which Ormond could have formed an idea. Every part well performed, nothing to break the illusion. This first fit of dramatic enthusiasm was the third day at its height, when Connell returned from Versailles, and it was so strong upon him, and he was so full of Molière and Madame de la Rouette, that he could scarcely listen to what Connell said of Versailles, the King's supper, and Madame la Dauphine. No doubt he should like to see all that, but at all events he was positively determined to see Molière and Madame de la Rouette every night they acted. Connell smiled, and only answered, "Of course he would do as he pleased." But in the meantime it was now Madame de Connell's night for seeing company, and he was to make his début in a French assembly. Connell called for him early, that they might have a few minutes to themselves before the company should arrive. Ormond felt some curiosity, a little anxiety, a slight flutter at the heart, at the thought of seeing Dora again. The arrival of her husband interrupted these thoughts. Connell took the light from the hands of Crépin, the valet, and reviewed Ormond from head to foot. "Very well, Crépin, you have done your part, and nature has done hers for monsieur." "Yes, truly," said Crépin, "nature has done wonders for monsieur, and monsieur, now he is dressed, has really all the air of a Frenchman." "Quite l'air comme il faut, l'air noble," added Connell, and he agreed with Crépin in opinion that French dress made an astonishing difference in Mr. Ormond. "Madame de Connell, I am sure, will think so," continued Connell, "will see it with admiration, for she really has good taste. I will pledge myself for your success. With that figure, with that air, you will turn many heads in Paris, if you will but talk enough. Say everything that comes into your head. Don't be like an Englishman, always thinking about the sense. The more nonsense, the better. Trust me. Livrez-vous. Let yourself out. Follow me, and fear nothing," cried he, running downstairs, delighted with Ormond and with himself. He foresaw that he should gain credit by producing such a man. He really wished that Ormond should succeed in French society, and that he should pass his time agreeably in Paris. No man could feel better disposed towards another. Even if he should take a fancy to madame, it was to the polite French husband a matter of indifference, except so far as the arrangement might or might not interfere with his own views. And these views, what were they? Only to win all the young man's fortune at play. À cela près, accepting this, he was sincerely Ormond's friend, ready to do everything possible, de faire l'impossible, to oblige and entertain him. Connell enjoyed Ormond's surprise at the magnificence of his hotel. After ascending a spacious staircase and passing through antechamber after antechamber, they reached the splendid salon, blazing with lights, reflected on all sides in mirrors that reached from the painted ceiling to the inlaid floor. "Not a creature here yet, happily?" "Madame begs," said the servant, "that monsieur will pass on into the boudoir." "Anybody with madame?" "No one but Madame de Clerville." "Only l'ami intime," said Connell, "the bosom friend." "How will Dora feel? How will it be with us both?" thought Ormond, as he followed the light step of the husband. "Entrez, entrez toujours." Ormond stopped at the threshold, absolutely dazzled by the brilliancy of Dora's beauty, her face, her figure, her air, so infinitely improved, so fashioned. "Dora! Madame de Connell!" cried Ormond. No French actor could have done it better than nature did it for him. Dora gave one glance at Ormond. Pleasure, joy sparkled in her eyes. Then, leaning on the lady who stood beside her, almost sinking, Dora sighed and exclaimed, "Ah, Harry Ormond!" The husband vanished. "Ah, ciel!" said l'ami intime, looking towards Ormond. "Help me to support her, monsieur, while I seek the l'eau de Cologne." Ormond, seized with sudden tremor, could scarcely advance. Dora sunk on the sofa, clasping her beautiful hands, and exclaiming, "The companion of my earliest days!" Then Ormond, excused to himself, sprang forward. "Friend of my childhood!" cried he. "Yes, my sister! Your father promised me this friendship, this happiness," said he, supporting her, as she raised herself from the sofa. "Où est-il? Où est-il? Where is he, Monsieur Ormond?" cried Mademoiselle, throwing open the door. "Ah, ciel, comme il est beau! A perfect Frenchman already, and how much embellished by dress! Ah, Paris for that! Did I not prophesy? Dora, my darling, do me the justice. But, comme vous voilà saisie! Here's l'ami with l'eau de Cologne. Ah, my child, recover yourself, for here is someone. The Comte de Jarillac, it is entering the salon." The promptitude of Dora's recovery was a new surprise to our hero. "Follow me," said she to him, and with Parisian ease and grace she glided into the salon to receive Monsieur de Jarillac, presented Ormond to Monsieur le Comte, Anglois, Irlandois, an English, an Irish gentleman, the companion of her childhood, with the lightest tone of sentiment imaginable; and another count, and another came, and a baron, and a marquis, and a duke, and Madame la Comtesse de , and Madame la Duchesse , and all were received with ease, respect, vivacity, or sentiment, as the occasion required, now advancing a step or two to mark empressement where requisite, regaining always imperceptibly the most advantageous situation and attitude for herself, presenting Ormond to everyone, quite intent upon him, yet appearing entirely occupied with everybody else, and, in short, never forgetting them, him, or herself for an instant. "Can this be Dora?" thought Ormond, in admiration, yet in astonishment that divided his feelings. It was indeed wonderful to see how quickly, how completely, the Irish country girl had been metamorphosed into a French woman of fashion. And now, surrounded by admirers, by adorers in embroidery, and blazing with crosses and stars, she received les hommages, enjoyed le succès, accepted the incense without bending too low or holding herself too high, not too sober nor too obviously intoxicated. Vanity in all her heart, yet vanity not quite turning her head, not more than was agreeable and becoming, extending her smiles to all, and hoping all the time that Harry Ormond envied each. Charmed with him, for her early passion for him had revived in an instant. The first sight of his figure and air, the first glance in the boudoir, had been sufficient. She knew, too, how well he would succeed at Paris, how many rivals she would have in a week. These perceptions, sensations, and conclusions, requiring so much time in slow words to express, had darted through Dora's head in one instant, had exalted her imagination, and touched her heart, as much as that heart could be touched. Ormond meantime breathed more freely, and recovered from his tremors. Madame de Connell, surrounded by adorers and shining in the salon, was not so dangerous as Dora, half fainting in the boudoir. Nor had any words that wit or sentiment could devise power to please or touch him so much as the "Harry Ormond," which had burst naturally from Dora's lips. Now he began almost to doubt whether nature or art prevailed. Now he felt himself safe, at least, since he saw that it was only the coquette of the Black Islands transformed into the coquette of the Hôtel de Connell. The transformation was curious, was admirable. Ormond thought he could admire without danger, and in due time perhaps gallant with the best of them, without feeling, without scruple. The tables were now arranging for play. The conversation he heard everywhere round him related to the good or bad fortune of the preceding nights. Ormond perceived that it was the custom of the house to play every evening, and the expressions that reached him about bets and debts confirmed the hint which his guardian had given him that Connell played high. At present, however, he did not seem to have any design upon Ormond. He was engaged at the further end of the room. He left him quite to himself, and to madame, and never once even asked him to play. There seemed more danger of his being left out than of his being taken in. "Donnez-moi le bras. Come with me, Monsieur Ormond," said mademoiselle, "and you shall lose nothing. While they are settling about their parties, we can get one little moment's chat." She took him back to the boudoir. "I want to make you know our Paris," said she. "Here we can see the whole world pass in review, and I shall tell you everything most necessary for you to know. For example, who is who, and still more it imports you to know who and who are together. Look at that lady, beautiful as the day, in diamonds." "Madame de Connell, do you mean?" said Ormond. "Ah, no, not her always," said mademoiselle. "Though she has the apple here without contradiction," continued mademoiselle, still speaking in English, which it was always her pride to speak to whomsoever could understand her. "Absolutely, without vanity, though my niece, I may say it, she is a perfect creature, and mise à ravir. Did you ever see such a change for the best in one season? Ah, Paris! Did I not tell you well? And you felt it well yourself. You lost your head, I saw that, at first sight of her à la Françoise. The best proof of your taste and sensibilité. She has infinite sensibility too. Interesting, and at the height, what you English call the tip-top of the fashion here." So it appears, indeed, said Ormond, by the crowd of admirers I see round Madame de Connel. Admirers, yes, adorers, you may say. Encore, if you added lovers, you would not be much wrong. Dying for love, éperdument épris. See there, he who is bowing now, Monsieur le Marquis de Beaulieu, homme de cour, plein d'esprit, homme marquant, very remarkable man. But, ah, voilà qui entre, of the court. Did you ever see finer entrée made by man into a room so full of grace? Ah, le Comte de Bellechasse, how many women already he has lost! It is a real triumph to Madame de Connel to have him in her chains. What a smile! C'est lui qui est aimable pour nous autres, d'une soumission pour les femmes, d'une fierté pour les hommes. As the lamb gentle for the pretty woman, as the lion terrible for the man. It is that Comte de Bellechasse who is absolutely irresistible. Absolutely irresistible? Ormond repeated, smiling. Not absolutely, I hope. Oh, that is understood. You do not doubt la sagesse de madame. Besides, heureusement, there is an infinite safety for her in the number, as you see, of her adorers. Wait till I name them to you. I shall give you a catalogue raisonné. With rapid enunciation, mademoiselle went through the names and rank of the circle of adorers, noting with complacency the number of ladies to whom each man of gallantry was supposed to have paid his addresses. Next to being of the blood royal, this appearing to be of the highest distinction. And apropos, Monsieur d'Armand, you yourself, when do you count to go to Versailles? Ah, when you shall see the king and the king's supper, and Madame la Dauphine. Ah! Mademoiselle was recalled from the ecstasy in which she had thrown up her eyes to heaven by some gentleman speaking to her as he passed the open door of the boudoir, arm in arm with a lady. Mademoiselle answered with a profound inclination of the head, whispering to Ormond after they had passed, Monsieur le Duc de C, with Madame de la Tour. Why he is constant always to that woman, heaven knows better than me. Stand, if you are so good, monsieur, a little more this way, and give your attention. They don't want you yet at play. Then, designating every person at the different card tables, she said, That lady is the wife of Monsieur Blanc, and there is Monsieur le Baron de L, her lover, the gentleman who looks over her cards, and that other lady with the joli pompon, she is intimate with Monsieur de la Tour, the husband of the lady who passed with Monsieur le Duc. Mademoiselle explained all these arrangements with the most perfect sang-froid, as things of course that everybody knew and spoke of, except just before the husbands. But there was no mystery, no concealment. What use? To what good? Ormond asked whether there were any ladies in the room who were supposed to be faithful to their husbands. Ma nièce, par exemple, Madame de Connel, I may cite as a woman of la plus belle réputation, sans tache, what you call unblemish. Assuredly, said Ormond. You could not, I hope, think me so indiscreet. I believe I said ladies in the plural number. Ah, oui, assuredly, and I can name you 20. To begin, there. Do you see that woman standing up, who has the air as if she think of nothing at all, and nobody thinking of her, with only her husband near her? Cette grande âme blême. There is Madame de la Rousse, d'une réputation intacte. Frightfully dressed, as she is always. But hold, you see that pretty little Comtesse de la Brie, all in white? Charmante! I give her to you as a reputation against which slander cannot breathe. Nouvelle mariée, bride, in what you call the honeymoon, but we don't know that in French. No matter. Again, since you are curious in these things, there is another reputation without spot. Madame de Saint-Ange, I warrant her to you. Bien froide, celle-là, cold as any English. Married a full year, and still her choice to make. Allons, There is three, I give you already, without counting my niece. And wait, I will find you yet another," said mademoiselle, looking carefully through the crowd. She was relieved from her difficulty by the entrance of the little abbe, who came to summon monsieur to Madame de Connell, who did him the honour to invite him to the table. Ormond played, and fortune smiled upon him, as she usually does upon a new votary, and beauty smiled upon him perhaps on the same principle. Connell never came near him till supper was announced, then only to desire him to give his arm to a charming little countess, la nouvelle mariée, Madame de Connell belonging by right of rank to Monsieur le Comte de Bellechasse. The supper was one of the delightful petits soupers for which Paris was famous at that day, and which she will never see again. The moralist who considers the essential interests of morality more than the immediate pleasures of society will think this rather a matter of rejoicing than regret. How far such society and correct female conduct be compatible is a question which it might take too long a time to decide. Therefore, be it sufficient here to say that Ormond, without staying to examine it, was charmed with the present effect, with the gaiety, the wit, the politeness, the ease, and altogether with that indescribable thing, that untranslatable esprit de société. He could not afterwards remember anything very striking or very solid that had been said, but all was agreeable at the moment, and there was great variety. Ormond's self-love was, he knew not how, flattered. Without effort, it seemed to be the object of everybody to make Paris agreeable to him, and they convinced him that he would find it the most charming place in the world, without any disparagement to his own country, to which all solid honours and advantages were left undisputed. The ladies, whom he had thought so little captivating at first view at the theatre, were all charming on farther acquaintance, so full of vivacity, and something so flattering in their manner, that it put a stranger at once at his ease. Toward the end of the supper he found himself talking to two very pretty women at once, with good effect, and thinking at the same time of Dora and the Comte de Bellechasse. Moreover, he thought he saw that Dora was doing the same between the irresistible Comte and the Marquis plein d'esprit, from whom, while she was listening and talking without intermission, her eyes occasionally strayed, and once or twice met those of Ormond. "Is it indiscreet to ask you whether you passed your evening agreeably?" said Monsieur de Connell, when the company had retired. "Delightfully," said Ormond. "The most agreeable evening I ever passed in my life." Then, fearing that he had spoken with too much enthusiasm, and that the husband might observe that his eyes, as he spoke, involuntarily turned towards Madame de Connell, he moderated he might have saved himself the trouble he moderated his expression by adding that as far as he could judge, he thought French society very agreeable. "You have seen nothing yet. You are right not to judge hastily," said Connell. "But so far I am glad you are tolerably well satisfied." "Ah, oui, Monsieur Ormond," cried mademoiselle, joining them. "We shall fix you at Paris, I expect." "You hope, I suppose you mean, my dear aunt," said Dora, with such flattering hope in her voice, and in the expression of her countenance, that Ormond decided that he certainly intended to spend the winter at Paris. Connell, satisfied with this certainty, would have let Ormond go, but mademoiselle had many compliments to make him and herself upon his pronunciation, and his fluency in speaking the French language, really like a Frenchman himself, the Marquis de Beaulieu had said to her. She was sure Monsieur d'Ormond could not fail to succeed in Paris, with that perfection added to all his other advantages. It was the greatest of all the advantages in the world, the greatest advantage in the universe, she was going on to say. But Monsieur de Connell finished the flattery better. "You would pity us, Ormond," cried he, interrupting mademoiselle, "if you could see and hear the vandals they send to us from England with letters of introduction. Barbarians who can neither sit, stand, nor speak, nor even articulate the language. How many of these Butours, rich, of good family, I have been sometimes called upon to introduce into society, and to present at court. Upon my honour, it has happened to me to wish they might hang themselves out of my way, or be found dead in their beds the day I was to take them to Versailles." "It is really too great a tax upon the good breeding of the lady of the house," said Madame de Connell. "Deplorable when she has nothing better to say of an English guest than that ce monsieur-là a un grand talent pour le silence." Ormond, conscious that he had talked away at a great rate, was pleased by this indirect compliment. "But such personnages muets never really see French society. They never obtain more than a supper, not a petit souper. No, no, an invitation to a great assembly where they see nothing. Milord Anglois is lost in the crowd, or stuck across a doorway by his own sword. Now, what could any letter of recommendation do for such a fellow as that?" "The letters of recommendation which are of most advantage," said Madame de Connell, "are those which are written in the countenance." Ormond had presence of mind enough not to bow, though the compliment was directed distinctly to him. A look of thanks, he knew, was sufficient. As he retired, mademoiselle, pursuing him to the door, begged that he would come as early as he could next morning, that she might introduce him to her apartments, and explain to him all the superior conveniences of a French house. Monsieur de Connell, representing, however, that the next day Mr. Ormond was to go to Versailles, mademoiselle acknowledged that was an affair to which all others must yield. Well flattered by all the trio, and still more perhaps by his own vanity, our young hero was at last suffered to depart. The first appearance at Versailles was a matter of great consequence. Court dress was then an affair of as much importance at Paris as it seems to be now in London, if we judge by the columns of birthday dresses and the honourable notice of gentlemen's coats and waistcoats. It was then at Paris, however, as it is now and ever will be all over the world, essential to the appearance of a gentleman that whatever time, pains, or expense it might have cost, he should, from the moment he is dressed, be, or at least seem to be, above his dress. In this, as in most cases, the shortest and safest way to seem is to be. Our young hero, being free from personal conceit or overweening anxiety about his appearance, looked at ease. He called at the Hôtel de Connell the day he was to go to Versailles, and mademoiselle was in ecstasy at the sight of his dress, exclaiming, "Superbe! Magnifique!" Monsieur de Connell seemed more struck with his air than his dress, and Dora, perhaps, was more pleased with his figure. She was silent, but it was a silence that spoke. Her husband heeded not what it said, but, pursuing his own course, observed that, to borrow the expression of Crépin, the valet de chambre, no contemptible judge in these cases, Monsieur Ormond looked not only as if he was né coiffé, but as if he had been born with a sword by his side. "Really, my dear friend," continued Monsieur de Connell, "you look as if you had come at once full dressed into the world, which in our days is better than coming ready armed out of the head of Jupiter." Mademoiselle Ophélie, now seizing upon Ormond, whom she called her pupil, carried him off to show him her apartments and the whole house, which she did with many useful notes, pointing out the convenience and entire liberty that result from the complete separation of the apartments of the husband and wife in French houses. You see, Monsieur et Madame, with their own staircases, their own passages, their own doors in and out, and all separate for the people of Monsieur and the women of Madame, and here through this little door you go into the apartments of Madame." Ormond's English foot stopped respectfully. Entrez toujours," said mademoiselle, as the husband had said before at the door of the boudoir. "But Madame de Connell is dressing, perhaps," said Ormond. "Et puis? And what then? You must get rid as fast as you can of your English préjugés. And she is not here neither," said mademoiselle, opening the door. Madame de Connell was in an inner apartment, and Ormond, the instant after he entered this room with mademoiselle, heard a quick step, which he knew was Dora's, running to bolt the door of the inner room. He was glad that she had not quite got rid of her English prejudices. Mademoiselle Ophélie pointed out to him all the accommodations of a French apartment. She had not at this moment the slightest malice or bad intention in anything she was saying. She simply spoke in all the innocence of a Frenchwoman, if that term be intelligible. If she had any secret motive, it was merely the vanity of showing that she was quite Parisienne. And there again she was mistaken, for having lived half her life out of Paris, she had forgotten, if she ever had it, the tone of good society, and upon her return had overdone the matter, exaggerated French manners, to prove to her niece that she knew les usages, les convenances, les nuances, enfin la mode de Paris. A more dangerous guide in Paris for a young married woman in every respect could scarcely be found. Monsieur de Connell's valet now came to let Mr. Ormond know that Monsieur waited his orders. But for this interruption he was in a fair way to hear all the private history of the family, all the secrets that mademoiselle knew. Of the amazing communicativeness of French women on all subjects, our young hero had as yet no conception. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Ormond by Maria Edgeworth. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. It was during the latter years of the life of Louis XV, and during the reign of Madame du Barry, that Ormond was at Paris. The court of Versailles was at this time in all its splendor, if not in all its glory. At the souper du roi, Ormond beheld, in all the magnificence of dress and jewels, the nobility, wealth, fashion, and beauty of France. Well might the brilliancy dazzle the eyes of a youth fresh from Ireland, when it amazed even old ambassadors, accustomed to the ordinary grandeur of courts. When he recovered from his first astonishment, when his eyes were a little better used to the light, and he looked round and considered all these magnificently decorated personages, assembled for the purpose of standing at a certain distance to see one man eat his supper, it did appear to him an extraordinary spectacle, and the very great solemnity and devotion of the assistants, so unsuited to the French countenance, inclined him to smile. It was well for him, however, that he kept his Irish risible muscles in order, and that no courtier could guess his thoughts. A smile would have lost him his reputation. Nothing in the world appeared to Frenchmen, formerly, of more importance than their court etiquette, though there were some who began about this time to suspect that the court order of things might not be coexistent with the order of nature, though there were some philosophers and statesmen who began to be aware that the daily routine of the courtier's etiquette was not as necessary as the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. Nor could it have been possible to convince half at least of the crowd who assisted at the king's supper this night, that all the French national eagerness about the health, the looks, the words of Le Roi, all the attachment, le dévouement, professed habitually, perhaps felt habitually, for the reigning monarch, whoever or whatever he might be, by whatever name, notre bon roi, or simply notre roi de France, should in a few years pass away and be no more seen. Ormond had no concern with the affairs of the nation, nor with the future fate of anything he beheld. He was only a spectator, a foreigner, and his business was, according to mademoiselle's maxim, to enjoy to-day and to reflect to-morrow. His enjoyment of this day was complete. He not only admired, but was admired. In the vast crowd he was distinguished. Some nobleman of note asked who he was. Another observed l'air noble. Another exclaimed le bel Anglois, and his fortune was made at Paris, especially as a friend of Madame du Barry's asked where he bought his embroidery. He went afterwards, at least in Connell's society, by the name of le bel Anglois. Half in a tone of raillery, yet with a look that showed she felt it to be just, Madame de Connell first adopted the appellation, and then changed the term to mon bel Irlandois. Invitations upon invitations poured upon Ormond. All were eager to have him at their parties. He was everywhere, attending Madame de Connell, and she how proud to be attended by Ormond. He dreaded lest his principles should not withstand the strong temptation. He could not leave her, but he determined to see her only in crowds. Accordingly, he avoided every select party. L'ami intime could never, for the first 3 weeks, get him to one petit comité, though Madame de Connell assured him that her friend's petit souper were charming, worth all the crowded assemblies in Paris. Still he pursued his plan, and sought for safety in a course of dissipation. "I give you joy," said Connell to him one day. "You are fairly launched. You are no distressed vessel to be taken in tow, nor a pretty bark to sail in any man's wake. You have a gale, and are likely to have a triumph of your own." Connell was, upon all occasions, careful to impress upon Ormond's mind that he left him wholly to himself, for he was aware that in former days he had offended his independent spirit by airs of protection. He managed better now. He never even invited him to play, though it was his main object to draw him to his faro table. He made use of some of his friends or confederates, who played for him, Connell occasionally coming to the table as an unconcerned spectator. Ormond played with so much freedom, and seemed to have so gentlemanlike an indifference whether he lost or won, that he was considered as an easy dupe. Time only was necessary, Monsieur de Connell thought, to lead him on gradually and without alarm, to let him warm to the passion for play. Meanwhile, Madame de Connell felt as fully persuaded that Ormond's passion for her would increase. It was her object to fix him at Paris, but she should be content, perfectly happy, with his friendship, his society, his sentiments. Her own sentiment for him, as she confessed to Madame de Clerville, was absolutely invincible, but it should never lead her beyond the bounds of virtue. It was involuntary, but it should never be a crime. Madame de Clerville, who understood her business and spoke with all the fashionable cant of sensibility, asked how was it possible that an involuntary sentiment could ever be a crime? As certainly as the novice among a band of sharpers is taught, by the technical language of the gang, to conquer his horror of crime, So certainly does the cant of sentiment operate upon the female novice, and vanquish her fear of shame and moral horror of vice. The illusion is coarse, so much the better. Strength, not elegance, is necessary on some occasions to make an impression. The truth will strike the good sense and good feelings of our countrywomen, and unadorned they will prefer it to German or French sophistry. By such sophistry, however, was Dora insensibly led on. But Ormond did not yet advance in learning the language of sentiment. He was amusing himself in the world, and Dora imagined that the dissipation in which he lived prevented him from having time to think of his passion. She began to hate the dissipation. Connell, one day, when Dora was present, observed that Ormond seemed to be quite in his natural element in this sea of pleasure. "Who would have thought it?" said Dora. "I thought Mr. Ormond's taste was more for domestic happiness and retirement." "Retirement at Paris," said Ormond. "Domestic happiness at Paris," said Connell. Madame de Connell sighed. No, it was Dora that sighed. "Where do you go to-night?" said her husband. "Nowhere. I shall stay at home. And you?" said she, looking up at Harry Ormond. "To Madame de la Tour's." "That's the affair of half an hour. Only to appear." "Afterwards to the opera," said Ormond. "And after the opera, can't you sup here?" said Madame de Connell. "With the utmost pleasure, but that I am engaged to Madame de la Brie's ball." "That's true!" cried Madame de Connell, starting up. "I had forgot it. So am I, this fortnight. I may as well go to the opera too, and I can carry you to Madame de la Tour's. I owe her a 5 minutes sitting, though she is un peu précieuse. And what can you find in that little cold Madame de la Brie? Do you like ice?" "He liked to break the ice, I suppose," said mademoiselle. "Ma foi, you must then take a hatchet there." "No occasion. I had rather slide upon the ice than break it. My business at Paris is merely, you know, to amuse myself," said he, looking at Connell. "Glissez, mortel, n'appuyez pas." "But if ice should melt of itself," said mademoiselle, "what would you do then? What would become of him then, do you think, my dear niece?" It was a case which she did not like to consider. Dora blushed. No creature was so blind as mademoiselle, with all her boasted quickness and penetration. From this time forward no more was heard of Madame de Connell's taste for domestic life and retirement. She seemed quite convinced, either by her husband or by Mr. Ormond, or both, that no such thing was practicable at Paris. She had always liked le grand monde. She liked it better now than ever when she found Ormond in every crowded assembly, every place of public amusement, a continual round of breakfasts, dinners, balls, court balls, bals masqués, bal de l'opéra, plays, grand entertainments, petits soupers, fêtes at Versailles, pleasure in every possible form and variety of luxury and extravagance succeeded day after day and night after night. And Ormond, le bel Irlandois, once in fashion, was everywhere, and everywhere admired, flattered by the women who wished to draw him in to be their partners at play, still more flattered by those who wished to engage him as a lover, most of all flattered by Dora. He felt his danger. Improved in coquetry by Parisian practice and power, Dora tried her utmost skill. She played off with great dexterity her various admirers to excite his jealousy. The Marquis de Beaulieu, the witty marquis, and the Count de Bellechasse, the irresistible count, were dangerous rivals. She succeeded in exciting Ormond's jealousy, But in his noble mind there were strong opposing principles to withstand his selfish gratification. It was surprising with what politeness to each other, with how little love, all the suitors carried on this game of gallantry and competition of vanity. Till Ormond appeared, it had been the general opinion that before the end of the winter or the spring, the Count de Bellechasse would be triumphant. Why Ormond did not enter the lists, when there appeared to all the judges such a chance of his winning the prize, seemed incomprehensible to the spectators, and still more to the rival candidates. Some settled it with the exclamation, ennui. Others pronounced that it was English bizarrerie. Everything seemed to smooth the slippery path of temptation, the indifference of her husband, the imprudence of her aunt, and the sophistry of Madame de Clerville, the general customs of French society, the peculiar profligacy of the society into which he happened to be thrown, the opinion which he saw prevailed, that if he withdrew from the competition, a rival would immediately profit by his forbearance, conspired to weaken his resolution. Many accidental circumstances concurred to increase the danger. At these balls, to which he went originally to avoid Dora in smaller parties, Madame de Connell, though she constantly appeared, seldom danced. She did not dance well enough to bear comparison with French dancers. Ormond was in the same situation. The dancing which was very well in England would not do in Paris. No late lessons could, by any art, bring them to an equality with French nature. "Ah, il ne danse pas. He dances like an Englishman." At the first ball this comforted the suitors, and most the Comte de Bellechasse. But this very circumstance drew Ormond and Dora closer together. She pretended headaches, and languor, and lassitude, and, in short, sat still. But it was not to be expected that the Comte de Bellechasse could give up dancing. The Comte de Bellechasse danced like le dieu de la danse, another Vestris. He danced every night, and Ormond sat and talked to Dora, for it was his duty to attend Madame when the little Abbé was out of the way. The spring was now appearing, and the spring is delightful in Paris, and the promenades in the Champs-Élysées, and in the Bois de Boulogne, and the promenade in the Longchamp commenced. Riding was just coming into high fashion with the French ladies, and instead of riding in men's clothes, and like a man, it was now the ambition de monter à cheval à l'angloise. To ride on a side saddle and in an English riding habit was now the ambition. Now Dora, though she could not dance as well, could ride better than any Frenchwoman, and she was ambitious to show herself and her horsemanship in the Bois de Boulogne. But she had no horse that she liked. Le Comte de Bellechasse offered to get one broke for her at the King's riding house. This she refused, but fortunately Ormond, as was the custom with the English at that time, had, after his arrival, some English horses brought over to him at Paris. Among these was the horse he had once broke for Dora. For this an English side saddle was procured, she was properly equipped and mounted. And the two friends, le bel Irlandois, as they persisted in calling Ormond, and la belle Irlandoise, and their horses, and their horsemanship, were the admiration of the promenade. The Comte de Bellechasse sent to London for an English horse at any price. He was out of humour, and Ormond in the finest humour imaginable. Dora was grateful. Her horse was a beautiful, gentle-spirited creature. It was called Harry. It was frequently patted and caressed, and told how much it was valued and loved. Ormond was now in great danger, because He felt himself secure that he was only a friend, l'ami de la maison. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of Ormond by Maria Edgeworth. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. There was a picture of Dagot's, which was at this moment an object of fashionable curiosity in Paris. It was a representation of one of the many charitable actions of the unfortunate Marie Antoinette, then Dauphiness, at that time full of life and splendor and joy, adorning and cheering the elevated sphere she just began to move in, and yet diffusing life and hope and joy in that lower sphere to which the radiance of the great and happy seldom reaches. The Dauphiness was at that time the pride of France and the darling of Paris, not only worshipped by the court, but loved by the people. While she was Dauphiness, and during the commencement of her reign, everything, even disastrous accidents and the rigor of the season, served to give her fresh opportunity of winning the affection and exciting the enthusiasm of the people. When, during the festivities on her marriage, hundreds were crushed to death by the fall of a temporary building, the sensibility of the Dauphiness, the eagerness with which she sent all her money to the lieutenant de police for the families of those who had perished, conciliated the people, and turned even the evil presage to good. Again, during a severe frost, her munificence to the suffering poor excited such gratitude that the people erected to her honor a vast pyramid of snow. Frail memorial! These marks of respect were almost as transitory as the snowy pyramid. Ormond went with Mademoiselle Ophélie one morning to see the picture of the Dauphiness, and he had now an opportunity of seeing a display of French sensibility, that eagerness to feel and to excite a sensation, that desire to produce an effect, to have a scene, that half real, half theatric enthusiasm by which the French character is peculiarly distinguished from the English. He was perfectly astonished by the quantity of exclamations he heard at the sight of this picture, the lifting up of hands and eyes, the transports, the ecstasies, the tears, the actual tears that he saw streaming in despite of rouge. It was real, and it was not real feeling. Of one thing he was clear, that this superfluity of feeling or exaggeration of expression completely silenced him, and made him cold indeed, like one unskilled or dumb he seemed to stand. "But are you of marble?" cried mademoiselle. "Where is your sensibilité, then?" "I hope it is safe at the bottom of my heart," said Ormond. "But when it is called for, I cannot always find it, especially on these public occasions." "Ah, but what good all the sensibilité in the world do at the bottom of your heart, where nobody see it? It is on these public occasions, too, you must always contrive and find it quick at Paris, or after all you will seem but an Englishman." "I must be content to seem and to be what I am," said Ormond, in a tone of playful but determined resignation. "Bon," said a voice near him. Mademoiselle went off in impatience to find some better auditor. She did not hear the bon. Ormond turned and saw near him a gentleman whom he had often met at some of the first houses in Paris, the Abbé Morellet, then respected as the most reasonable of all the wits of France, and who has since, through all the trying scenes of the Revolution, through all the varieties of unprincipled change, preserved unaltered the integrity and frankness of his character, retaining even to his 87th year all his characteristic warmth of heart and clearness of understanding. Le doyen de la littérature françoise, the love, respect, and admiration of every honest heart in France. May he live to receive among all the other tributes which his countrymen pay publicly and privately to his merit, this record of the impression his kindness left on grateful English hearts. Our young hero had often desired to be acquainted with the Abbé, but the Abbé had really hitherto passed him over as a mere young man of fashion, a mere milord Anglois, one of the ephemeral race who appear in Parisian society, vanish, and leave no trace behind. But now he did him the honor to enter into conversation with him. The Abbé peculiarly disliked all affectation of sentiment and exaggeration; they were revolting to his good sense, good taste, and feeling. Ormond won directly his good opinion and good will by having insisted upon it to mademoiselle that he would not, for the sake of fashion or effect, pretend to feel more than he really did. "Bah!" said the Abbé, "hear all those women now, and all those men; they do not know what they are saying; they make me sick. And besides, I am afraid these flattering courtiers will do no good to our young Dauphiness, on whom so much of the future happiness or misery of France will depend. Her heart is excellent, and they tell me she announces a strong character; but what head of a young beauty and a young queen will be able to withstand perpetual flattery? They will lead her wrong, and then will be the first to desert her. Trust me, I know Paris. All this might change as quickly as the turn of a weathercock. But I will not trouble you with forebodings, perhaps never to be realized. You see Paris, monsieur, at a fortunate time," continued he. "Society is now more agreeable, has more freedom, more life and variety, than at any other period that I can remember." Ormond replied by a just compliment to the men of letters, who at this period added so much to the brilliancy and pleasure of Parisian society. "But you have seen nothing of our men of literature, have you?" said the Abbé. "Much less than I wish. I meet them frequently in society, but as, unluckily, I have no pretensions to their notice, I can only catch a little of their conversation, when I am fortunate enough to be near them." "Yes," said the Abbé, with his peculiar look and tone of good-natured irony. "Between the pretty things you are saying and hearing from, fear nothing, I am not going to name any one, but every pretty woman in company. I grant you it must be difficult to hear reason in such a situation, as difficult almost as in the midst of the din of all the passions at the faro table. I observe, however, that you play with astonishing coolness. There is something still wanting. Excuse me, but you interest me, monsieur. The determination not to play at all?" "Beyond a certain sum I have resolved never to play," said Ormond. "Ah, but the appetite grows. L'appétit vient en mangeant. The danger is in acquiring the taste. Excuse me if I speak too freely." "Not at all. You cannot oblige me more. But there is no danger of my acquiring a taste for play, because I am determined to lose." "Bon," said the Abbé, "that is the most singular determination I ever heard. Explain that to me then, monsieur." "I have determined to lose a certain sum, suppose 500 guineas. I have won and lost backwards and forwards, and have been longer about it than you would conceive to be probable, but it is not lost yet. The moment it is, I shall stop short. By this means I have acquired all the advantages of yielding to the fashionable madness, without risking my future happiness." The Abbé was pleased with the idea, and with the frankness and Chapter 30 of Ormond by Maria Edgeworth. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Perry. One morning when Ormond awoke, the first thing he heard was that a person from Ireland was below, who was very impatient to see him. It was Patrickson, Sir Ulic O'Shane's confidential man of business. "What news from Castle Hermitage?" cried Ormond, starting up in his bed, surprised at the sight of Patrickson. "The best that can be. Never saw Sir Ulic in such heart. He has a share of the loan, and what news of the Annalys?" interrupted Ormond. "I know nothing about them at all, sir," said Patrickson, who was a methodical man of business, and whose head was always intent upon what he called the main chance. "I have been in Dublin, and heard no country news." "But have you no letter for me? And what brings you over so suddenly to Paris?" "I have a letter for you somewhere here, sir, only I have so many 'tis hard to find," said Patrickson, looking carefully over a parcel of letters in his pocket-book, but with such a drawling slowness of manner as put Ormond quite out of patience. Patrickson laid the letters on the bed one by one. "That's not it, and that's not it. That's for Monsieur Untel, Marchand, Rue Blank. That packet's from the Hamburg merchants. What brings me over? Why, sir, I have business enough, heaven knows." Patrickson was employed not only by Sir Ulic O'Shane, but by many Dublin merchants and bankers, to settle business for them with different houses on the continent. Ormond, without listening to the various digressions he made concerning the persons of mercantile consequence to whom the letters were addressed, or from whom they were answers, pounced upon the letter in Sir Ulic's handwriting, directed to himself, and tore it open eagerly, to see if there was any news of the Annalys. None. They were in Devonshire. The letter was merely a few lines on business. Sir Ulic now had the opportunity he had foreseen of laying out Ormond's money in the loan most advantageously for him, but there had been an omission in the drawing up of his power of attorney, which had been done in such a hurry on Ormond's leaving home. It gave power only to sell out of the 3 per cents, whereas much of Ormond's money was in the 4 per cents. Another power, Patrickson said, was necessary, and he had brought one for him to sign. Patrickson, in his slow manner, descanted upon the folly of signing papers in a hurry, just when people were getting into carriages, which was always the way with young gentlemen, he said. He took care that Ormond should do nothing in a hurry now, for he put on his spectacles and read the power, sparing him not a syllable of the law forms and repetitions. Ormond wrote a few kind lines to Sir Ulic, and earnestly besought him to find out something more about the Annalys. If Miss Annally were married, it must have appeared in the papers. What delayed the marriage? Was Colonel Albemarle dismissed or accepted? Where was he? Ormond said he would be content if Sir Ulic could obtain an answer to that single plain question. All the time Ormond was writing, Patrickson never stirred his forefinger from the spot where the signature was to be written at the bottom of the power of attorney. "Pray," said Ormond, looking up from the paper he was going to sign, "pray, Patrickson, are you really and truly an Irishman?" "By the father's side, I apprehend, sir, but my mother was English. Stay, sir, if you please, I must witness it." "Witness away," said Ormond, and after having signed this paper, empowering Sir Ulic to sell 30,000 pounds out of the 4 per cents, Ormond lay down, and, wishing him a good journey, settled himself to sleep; while Patrickson, packing up his papers, deliberately said, he hoped to be in London, in short, but that he should go by Havre de Grace, and that he should be happy to execute any commands for Mr. Ormond there or in Dublin. More he would have said, but finding Ormond by this time past reply, he left the room on tiptoe. The next morning Madame de Connell returned from the country, and sent Ormond word that she should expect him at her assembly that night. Everybody complimented Madame de Connell upon the improvement which the country air had made in her beauty. Even her husband was struck with it, and paid her his compliments on the occasion. But she stood conversing so long with Ormond that the faro players grew impatient. She led him to the table, but evidently had little interest herself in the game. He played at first with more than his usual success, but late at night his fortune suddenly changed. He lost, till at last he stopped, and, rising from table, said he had no more money, and he could play no longer. Connell, who was not one of the players, but merely looking on, offered to lend him any sum he pleased. "Here's a rouleau. Here are 2 rouleaux. What will you have?" said Connell. Ormond declined playing any more. He said that he had lost the sum he had resolved to lose, and there he would stop. Connell did not urge him, but, laughing, said that a resolution to lose at play was the most extraordinary he had ever heard. "And yet you see I have kept it," said Ormond. "Then I hope you will next make a resolution to win," said Connell, "and no doubt you will keep that as well. I prophesy that you will, and you will give fortune fair play to-morrow night." Ormond simply repeated that he should play no more. Madame de Connell soon afterwards rose from the table and went to talk to Mr. Ormond. She said she was concerned for his loss at play this night. He answered, as he felt, that it was a matter of no consequence to him, that he had done exactly what he had determined, that in the course of the whole time he had been losing this money, he had had a great deal of amusement in society, had seen a vast deal of human nature and manners, which he could not otherwise have seen, and that he thought his money exceedingly well employed. "But you shall not lose your money," said Dora. "When next you play, it shall be on my account as well as your own. You know this is not only a compliment, but a solid advantage. The bank has certain advantages, and it is fair that you should share them. I must explain to you," continued Madame de Connell. "They are all busy about their own affairs, and we may speak in English at our ease. I must explain to you that a good portion of my fortune has been settled so as to be at my own disposal. My aunt, you know, has also a good fortune. We are partners, and put a considerable sum into the Faro Bank. We find it answers well. You see how handsomely we live. Monsieur de Connell has his own share. We have nothing to do with that. If you would take my advice," continued she, speaking in a very persuasive tone, "instead of forswearing play, as you seem inclined to do at the first reverse of fortune, you would join forces with us. You cannot imagine that I would advise you to anything which I was not persuaded would be advantageous to you. You little know how much I am interested." She checked herself, blushed, hesitated, and hurried on. "You have no ties in Ireland. You seem to like Paris. Where can you spend your time more agreeably?" "More agreeably? Nowhere upon earth," cried Ormond. Her manner, tone, and look at this moment were so flattering, so bewitching, that he was scarcely master of himself. They went to the boudoir. The company had risen from the faro table, and one after another had most of them departed. Connell was gone. Only a few remained in a distant apartment, listening to some music. It was late. Ormond had never till this evening stayed later than the generality of the company, but he had now an excuse to himself, something that he had long wished to have an opportunity of saying to Dora when she should be quite alone. It was a word of advice about le Comte de Bellechasse. Her intimacy with him was beginning to be talked of. She had been invited to a bal paré at the Spanish ambassador's for the ensuing night, but she had more inclination to go to a bal masqué, as Ormond had heard her declare. Now certain persons had whispered that it was to meet the Comte de Bellechasse that she intended to go to this ball, and Ormond feared that such whispers might be injurious to her reputation. It was difficult to him to speak, because the counsels of the friend might be mistaken for the jealous fears of a lover. With some embarrassment, he delicately, timidly hinted his apprehensions. Dora, though naturally of a temper apt to take alarm at the touch of blame, and offence at the tone of advice, now, in the most graceful manner, thanked her friend for his counsel, said she was flattered, gratified by the interest it showed in her happiness, and she immediately yielded her will, her fantaisie, to his better judgment. This compliance, and the look with which it was accompanied, convinced him of the absolute power he possessed over her heart. He was enchanted with Dora. She never looked so beautiful. Never before, not even in the first days of his early youth, had he felt her beauty so attractive. "Dear Madame de Connell, dear Dora," he exclaimed. "Call me Dora," said she. "I wish ever to be Dora to Harry Ormond. Oh, Harry, my first, my best, my only friend! I have enjoyed but little real happiness since we parted." Tears filled her fine eyes. No longer knowing where he was, Harry Ormond found himself at her feet. But while he held and kissed in transport the beautiful hand, which was but feebly withdrawn, he seemed to be suddenly shocked by the sight of one of the rings on her finger. "My wedding ring," said Dora with a sigh. "Unfortunate marriage." That was not the ring on which Ormond's eyes were fixed. "Dora, whose grey hair is this?" "My father's," said Dora in a tremulous voice. "Your father!" cried Ormond, starting up. The full recollection of that fond father, that generous benefactor, that confiding friend, rushed upon his heart. "And is this the return I make? Oh, if he could see us at this instant!" "And if he could," cried Dora, "oh, how he would admire and love you, Ormond, and how he would—" Her voice failed, and with a sudden motion she hid her face with both her hands. "He would see you, Dora, without a guide, protector, or friend, surrounded with admirers, among profligate men, and women still more profligate. Yet he would see that you have preserved a reputation of which your father would be proud." "My father! Oh, my poor father!" cried Dora. "Oh, generous, dear, ever generous Ormond!" Bursting into tears, alternate passions seizing her, at one moment the thoughts of her father, the next of her lover, possessed her imagination. At this instant the noise of some one approaching recalled them both to their senses. They were found in earnest conversation about a party of pleasure that was to be arranged for the next day. Madame de Connell made Ormond promise that he would come the next morning and settle everything with Monsieur de Connell for their intended expedition into the country. The next day, as Ormond was returning to Madame de Connell's, with the firm intention of adhering to the honourable line of conduct he had traced out for himself, just as he was crossing the Pont Neuf, some one ran full against him. Surprised at what happens so seldom in the streets of Paris, where all meet, pass, or cross in crowds with magical celerity and address, he looked back, and at the same instant the person who had passed looked back also. An apparition in broad daylight could not have surprised Ormond more than the sight of this person. Could it be? Could it possibly be Moriarty Carroll on the Pont Neuf in Paris? "Boy, the blessing then! It's the man himself, Master Harry, though I didn't know him through the French disguise. Oh, master, then, I've been tried and cast, and all but hanged, sentenced to botany, transported anyway, for a robbery I didn't commit, since I saw you last. But your honour's uneasy, and it's not proper, I know, to be stopping a gentleman in the street, but I have a word to say that will bear no delay, not a minute." Ormond's surprise and curiosity increased. He desired Moriarty to follow him. "And now, Moriarty, what is it you have to say?" "It is a long story, then, please your honour. I was transported to botany, though innocent, but first and foremost, for what concerns your honour first." "First," said Ormond, "if you were transported, how came you here?" "Because I was not transported, plaise your honour, only sentenced, for I escaped from Kilmainham, where I was sent to be put on board the tender, but I got on board of an American ship, by the help of a friend, and this ship being knocked against the rocks, I came safe ashore in this country on one of the sticks of the vessel. So when I knowed it was France I was in, and recollected Miss Dora that was married in Paris, I thought if I could just make my way anyhows to Paris, she'd befriend me in case of need. But, dear master,' said Moriarty, interrupting, 'it's a folly to talk. I'll not tell you a word more of myself till you hear the news I have for you. The worst news I have to tell you is, there is great fear of the breaking of Sir Ulick's bank.' 'The breaking of Sir Ulick's bank! I heard from him the day before yesterday.' 'Maybe you did; but the captain of the American ship in which I came was complaining of his having been kept 2 hours at that bank, where they were paying large sums in small notes, and where there was the greatest run upon the house that ever was seen.' Ormond instantly saw his danger. He recollected the power of attorney he had signed 2 days before. But Patrickson was to go by Havre de Grace. That would delay him. It was possible that Ormond, by setting out instantly, might get to London time enough to save his property. He went directly and ordered post horses. He had no debts in Paris, nothing to pay, but for his stables and lodging. He had a faithful servant, whom he could leave behind to make all necessary arrangements. 'You are right, Joel, to be in a hurry,' said Carroll. 'But sure you won't leave poor Moriarty behind you here in distress, when he has no friend in the wide world but yourself.' 'Tell me, in the first place, Moriarty, are you innocent?' 'Upon my conscience, master, I am perfectly innocent as the child unborn, both of the murder and the robbery. If your honour will give me leave, I'll tell you the whole story.' 'That will be a long affair, Moriarty, if you talk out of the face as you used to do. I will, however, find an opportunity to hear it all. But in the meantime, stay where you are till I return.' Ormond went instantly to Connell's to inform him of what had happened. His astonishment was obviously mixed with disappointment. But, to do him justice, besides the interest which he really had in the preservation of the fortune, he felt some personal regard for Ormond himself. 'What shall we do without you?' said he. 'I assure you, madame and I have never been so happy together since the first month after our marriage as we have been since you came to Paris.' Connell was somewhat consoled by hearing Ormond say that if he were time enough in London to save his fortune, he proposed returning immediately to Paris, intending to make the tour of Switzerland and Italy. Connell had no doubt that they should yet be able to fix him at Paris. Madame de Connell and mademoiselle were out. Connell did not know where they were gone. Ormond was glad to tear himself away with as few adieus as possible. He got into his travelling carriage, put his servant on the box, and took Moriarty with him in the carriage, that he might relate his history at leisure. 'Plase your honour,' said Moriarty, 'Mr. Marcus never missed any opportunity of showing me ill will. The supercargo of the ship that was cast away, when you were with Sir Herbert Annerly, God rest his soul, came down to the seaside to look for some of the things he had lost. The day after he came, early in the morning, his horse and bridle and saddle and a surtout coat was found in a lane near the place where we lived, and the supercargo was never heard any more of. Suspicion fell upon many, the country rung with the noise that was made about this murder, and at last I was taken up for it, because people had seen me buy cattle at the fair, and the people would not believe it was with money your honour sent me by the good parson, for the parson was gone out of the country, and I had nobody to stand my friend, for Mr. Marcus was on the grand jury, and the sheriff was his friend, and Sir Ulick was in Dublin at the bank. Howsomedever, after a long trial, which lasted the whole day, a 'cute lawyer on my side found out that there was no proof that anybody had been murdered, and that a man might lose his horse, his saddle, and his bridle, and his big coat, without being kilt, so that the judge ordered the jury to let me off for the murder. Then they tried me for the robbery, and sure enough that went again me, for a pair of silver-mounted pistols, with the man's name engraved upon them, was found in my house. They knew the man's name by the letters in the big coat. The judge asked me what I had to say for myself. 'My lord,' says I, 'those pistols were brought into the house about a fortnight ago by a little boy, one little Tommy Dunshaughlin, who found them in a punk horn at the edge of a bog hole. The judge favoured me more than the jury, for he asked how old the boy was, and whether I could produce him. The little fellow was brought into court, and it was surprising how clear he told his story. The judge listened to the child, young as he was, but Macruel was on the jury, and said that he knew the child to be as cunning as any in Ireland, and that he would not believe a word that came out of his mouth. So the short and the long of it was, I was condemned to be transported. It would have done you good if you'd heard the cry in the court when sentence was given, for I was loved in the country. Poor Peggy and Sheila! But I'll not be troubling your honour's tender heart with our parting. I was transmuted to Dublin, to be put on board the tender, and lodged in Kilmainham, waiting for the ship that was to go to Botany. I had not been long there, when another prisoner was brought to the same room with me. He was a handsome-looking man, about 30 years of age, of the most penetrating eye and determined countenance that ever I saw. He appeared to be worn down with ill health, and his limbs much swelled, notwithstanding which he had strong handcuffs on his wrists, and he seemed to be guarded with uncommon care. He begged the turnkey to lay him down upon the miserable iron bed that was in the cell, and he begged him, for God's sake, to let him have a jug of water by his bedside, and to leave him to his fate. I could not help pitying this poor creature. I went to him and offered him any assistance in my power. He answered me shortly, "What are you here for?" I told him. "Well," says he, "whether you are guilty or not is your affair, not mine. But answer me at once. Are you a good man? Can you go through with a thing? And are you steel to the backbone?" "I am," said I. "Then," said he, "you are a lucky man, for he that is talking to you is Michael Dunn, who knows how to make his way out of any jail in Ireland." Saying this, he sprung with great activity from the bed. "It is my cue," said he, "to be sick and weak whenever the turnkey comes in, to put him off his guard, for they have all orders to watch me strictly, because as how, do you see, I broke out of the jail of Trim, and when they catched me, they took me before his honour the police magistrate, who did all he could to get out of me the way which I made my escape. 'Well,' says the magistrate, 'I'll put you in a place where you can't get out till you're sent to Botany.' 'Plaise your worship,' says I, 'if there's no offence in saying it, there's no such place in Ireland.' 'No such place as what?' 'No such place as will hold Michael Dunn.' 'What do you think of Kilmainham?' says he. 'I think it's a fine jail, and it will be no aisy matter to get out of it, but it is not impossible.' 'Well, Mr. Dunn,' said the magistrate, 'I have heard of your fame, and that you have secrets of your own for getting out. Now, if you'll tell me how you got out of the jail of Trim, I'll make your confinement at Kilmainham as aisy as may be, so as to keep you safe, and if you do not, you must be ironed, and I will have sentinels from an English regiment, who shall be continually changed, so that you can't get any of them to help you.' 'Plaise your worship,' said Dunn, 'that's very hard usage; but I know as how that you are going to build new jails all over Ireland, and that you'll be glad to know the best way to make them secure. If your worship will promise me that if I get out of Kilmainham, and if I tell you how I do it, then you'll get me a free pardon. I'll try hard, but what before 3 months are over, I'll be a prisoner at large.' 'That's more than I can promise you,' said the magistrate; 'but if you will disclose to me the best means of keeping other people in, I will endeavour to keep you from Botany Bay.' 'Now, sir,' says Dunn, 'I know your worship to be a man of honour, and that your own honour regards yourself and not me, so that if I was 10 times as bad as I am, you'd keep your promise with me, as well as if I was the best gentleman in Ireland. So that now, Mr. Moriarty,' said Dunn, 'do you see, if I get out, I shall be safe, and if you get out along with me, you have nothing to do but to go over to America, and if you are a married man and tired of your wife, you'll get rid of her. If you are not tired of her, and you have any substance, she may sell it and follow you.' There was something, Master Harry, about the man that made me have great confidence in him, and I was ready to follow his advice. Whenever the turnkey was comin', he was groaning and moaning on the bed. At other times he made me keep bathin' his wrists with cold water, so that in 3 or 4 days they were not half the size they were at first. This change he kept carefully from the gaoler. I observed that he frequently asked what day of the month it was, but that he never made any attempt to speak to the sentinels, nor did he seem to make any preparation, or to lay any scheme for getting out. I held my tongue, and waited quietly. At last he took out of his pocket a little flageolet, and began to play upon it. He asked me if I could play. I said I could a little, but very badly. I don't care how bad it is, if you can play at all. He got off the bed where he was lying, and with the utmost ease pulled his hands out of his handcuffs. Besides the swelling of his wrists having gone down, he had some method of getting rid of his thumb that I never could understand. Says I, Mr. Dunn, the gaoler will miss the fetters. No, said he, for I will put them on again. And so he did, with great ease. Now, said he, it is time to begin our work. He took off one of his shoes, and taking out the insole, he showed me a hole that was cut where the heel was, in which there was a little small flat bottle, which he told me was the most precious thing in life, and under the rest of the sole there were a number of saws made of watch spring, that lay quite flat and snug under his foot. The next time the turnkey came in, he begged, for the love of God, to have a pipe and some tobacco, which was accordingly granted to him. What the pipes and tobacco were for, I could not then guess, but they were found to be useful. He now made a paste of some of the bread of his allowance, with which he made a cup round the bottom of one of the bars of the window. Into this cup he poured some of the contents of the little bottle, which was, I believe, oil of vitriol. In a little time this made a bad smell, and it was then I found the use of the pipe and tobacco, for the smell of the tobacco quite bothered the smell of the vitriol. When he thought he had softened the iron bar sufficiently, he began to work away with the saws, and he soon taught me how to use them, so that we kept working on continually, no matter how little we did at a time, but as we were constantly at it, what I thought never could be done was finished in 3 or 4 days. The use of the flageolet was to drown the noise of the filing, for when one filed, the other piped. When the bar was cut through, he fitted the parts nicely together, and covered them over with rust. He proceeded in the same manner to cut out another bar, so that we had a free opening out of the window. Our cell was at the very top of the jail, so that even to look down to the ground was terrible. Under various pretences, we had got an unusual quantity of blankets on our beds. These he examined with the utmost care, as upon their strength our lives were to depend. We calculated with great coolness the breadth of the strips into which he might cut the blankets, so as to reach from the window to the ground, allowing for the knots by which they were to be joined, and for other knots that were to hinder the hands and feet from slipping. Now, said he, Mr. Moriarty, all this is quite aisy, and requires nothing but a determined heart and a sound head. But the difficulty is to baffle the sentinel that is below, and who is walking backward and forward continually, day and night, under the window. And there is another, you see, in a sentry box at the door of the yard, and for all I know there may be another sentinel at the other side of the wall. Now, these men are never twice on the same duty. I have friends enough out of doors, who have money enough, and would have talked reason to them. But as these sentinels are changed every day, no good can be got of them. But stay till to-morrow night, and we'll try what we can do. I was determined to follow him. The next night, the moment that we were locked in for the night, we set to work to cut the blankets into slips, and tied them together with great care. We put this rope round one of the fixed bars of the window, and, pulling at each knot, we satisfied ourselves that every part was sufficiently strong. Dunn looked frequently out of the window with the utmost anxiety. It was a moonlight night. "The moon," said he, "will be down in an hour and a half." In a little while we heard the noise of several girls singing at a distance from the windows, and we could see, as they approached, that they were dancing and making free with the sentinels. I saw that they were provided with bottles of spirits, with which they pledged the deluded soldiers. By degrees the sentinels forgot their duty, and by the assistance of some laudanum contained in some of the spirits, they were left senseless on the ground. The whole of this plan, and the very night and hour, had been arranged by Donne with his associates, before he was put into Kilmainham. The success of this scheme, which was totally unexpected by me, gave me, I suppose, please your honour, fresh courage. He very honourably gave me the choice to go down first or to follow him. I was ashamed not to go first. After I had got out of the window, and had fairly hold of the rope, my fear diminished, and I went cautiously down to the bottom. Here I waited for Donne, and we both of us silently stole along in the dark, for the moon had gone in, and we did not meet with the least obstruction. Our out-of-doors assistants had the prudence to get entirely out of sight. Donne led me to a hiding place in a safe part of the town, and committed me to the care of a seafaring man, who promised to get me on board an American ship. "As for my part," said Donne, "I will go in the morning boldly to the magistrate and claim his promise." He did so, and the magistrate, with good sense and good faith, kept his promise, and obtained a pardon for Donne. I wrote to Peggy to get aboard an American ship. I was cast away on the coast of France, made my way to the first religious house that I could hear of, where I luckily found an Irishman, who saved me from starvation, and who sent me on from convent to convent, till I got to Paris, where your honour met me on that bridge, just when I was looking for Miss Dora's house. And that's all I've got to tell," concluded Moriarty. "And all true." No adventures of any sort happened to our hero in the course of his journey. The wind was fair for England when he reached Calais. He had a good passage, and with all the expedition that good horses, good roads, good money, and civil words ensure in England, he pursued his way, and arrived in the shortest time possible in London. He reached town in the morning, before the usual hour when the banks are open. Leaving orders with his servant, on whose punctuality he could depend, to awaken him at the proper hour, he lay down, overcome with fatigue, and slept. Yes, slept soundly. End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of Ormond by Maria Edgeworth. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Ormond was wakened at the proper hour, went immediately to 's bank. It was but just open, and beginning to do business. He had never been there before. His person was not known to any of the firm. He entered a long narrow room, so dark at the entrance from the street that he could at first scarcely see what was on either side of him. A clerk from some obscure nook, and from a desk higher than himself, put out his head, with a long pen behind his ear, and looked at Ormond as he came in. "Pray, sir, am I right? Is this Mr. 's bank?" "Yes, sir." With mercantile economy of words, and a motion of his head, the clerk pointed out to Ormond the way he should go, and continued casting up his books. Ormond walked down the narrow aisle, and it became light as he advanced towards a large window at the farther end, before which 3 clerks sat at a table opposite to him. A person stood with his back to Ormond, and was speaking earnestly to one of the clerks, who leaned over the table listening. Just as Ormond came up, he heard his own name mentioned. He recollected the voice, he recollected the back of the figure, the very bottle green coat. It was Patrickson. Ormond stood still behind him, and waited to hear what was going on. "Sir," said the clerk, "it is a very sudden order for a very large sum." True, sir, but you see my power. You know Mr. Ormond's handwriting, and you know Sir Ulic O'Shane's. Mr. James, said the principal clerk, turning to one of the others, be so good to hand me the letters we have of Mr. Ormond. As we have never seen the gentleman sign his name, sir, it is necessary that we should be more particular in comparing. Oh, sir, no doubt. Compare as much as you please. No doubt people cannot be too exact and deliberate in doing business. It certainly is his signature, said the clerk. I witnessed the paper, said Patrickson. Sir, I don't dispute it, replied the clerk, but you cannot blame us for being cautious when such a very large sum is in question, and when we have no letter of advice from the gentleman. But I tell you, I come straight from Mr. Ormond. I saw him last Tuesday at Paris. And you see him now, sir, said Ormond, advancing. Patrickson's countenance changed beyond all power of control. Mr. Ormond, I thought you were at Paris. Mr. Patrickson, I thought you were at Havre de Grace. What brought you here so suddenly? I acted for another, hesitated Patrickson. I therefore made no delay. And thank heaven, said Ormond, I have acted for myself, but just in time. Sir, continued he, addressing himself to the principal clerk, gentlemen, I have to return you my thanks for your caution. It has actually saved me from ruin, for I understand. Ormond suddenly stopped, recollecting that he might injure Sir Ulic O'Shane essentially by a premature disclosure, or by repeating a report which might be ill-founded. He turned again to speak to Patrickson, but Patrickson had disappeared. Then, continuing to address himself to the clerks, Gentlemen, said Ormond, speaking carefully, have you heard anything of or from Sir Ulic O'Shane lately, except what you may have heard from this Mr. Patrickson? Not from, but of Sir Ulic O'Shane we heard from our Dublin correspondent. In due course we have heard, replied the head clerk. Too true, I am afraid, sir, that his bank had come to paying in sixpences on Saturday. The second clerk, seeing great concern in Ormond's countenance, added, But Sunday, you know, is in their favour, sir, and Monday and Tuesday are holidays, so they may stand the run and recover yet. With the help of this gentleman's 30,000, they might have recovered, perhaps, but Mr. Ormond would scarcely have recovered it. As to the £10,000 in the 3 per cents, of which Sir Ulic had obtained Chapter 32 of Ormond by Maria Edgeworth. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Both from a sense of justice to the poor people concerned, and from a desire to save Sir Ulic O'Shane's memory, as far as it was in his power, from reproach, Ormond determined to pay whatever small debts were due to his servants, workmen, and immediate dependents. For this purpose, when the funeral was over, he had them all assembled at Castle Hermitage. Every just demand of this sort was paid. All were satisfied, even the barefooted kitchen maid, the drudge of this great house, who in despair had looked at her poor 1 guinea note of Sir Ulic's, had that note paid in gold, and went away blessing Master Harry. Happy for all that he is come home to us, was the general feeling. But there was one man, a groom of Sir Ulic's, who did not join in any of these blessings or praises. He stood silent and motionless, with his eyes on the money which Mr. Ormond had put into his hand. "Is your money right?" said Ormond. "It is, sir, but I had something to tell you." When all the other servants had left the room, the man said, "I am the groom, sir, that was sent, just before you went to France, with a letter to Annalee. There was an answer to that letter, sir, though you never got it." "There was an answer!" cried Ormond, anger flashing, but an instant afterwards joy sparkling in his eyes. "There was a letter?" From whom? I'll forgive you all if you will tell me the whole truth. I will, and not a word of lie, and I beg your honour's pardon if— Go on, straight to the fact, this instant, or you shall never have my pardon. Why then, I stopped to take a glass, coming home, and not knowing how it was, I had the misfortune to lose the bit of a note, and I thought no more about it till, plaise your honour, after you was gone, it was found. Found! cried Ormond, stepping hastily up to him. Where is it? I have it safe here, said the man, opening a sort of pocket-book. Here I have kept it safe till your honour came back. Ormond saw and seized upon a letter in Lady Annalie's hand, directed to him, tore it open. 2 notes, one from Florence. I forgive you, said he to the man, and made a sign to him to leave the room. When Ormond had read, or without reading had taken in by one glance of the eye the sense of the letters, he rang the bell instantly. Inquire at the post office, said he to his servant, whether Lady Annalie is in England or Ireland. If in England, where? If in Ireland, whether at Annalie or at Herbertstown. Quick, an answer. An answer was quickly brought. In England, in Devonshire, sir. Here is the exact direction to the place, sir. I shall pack up, I suppose, sir? Certainly, directly. Leaving a few lines of explanation and affection for Dr. Cambray, our young hero was off again, to the surprise and regret of all who saw him driving away as fast as horses could carry him. His servant from the box, however, spread as he went, for the comfort of the deploring village, the assurance that master and he would soon be back again, plaise heaven, and happier than ever. And now that he is safe in the carriage, what was in that note of Miss Annalie's which has produced such a sensation? No talismanic charm ever operated with more magical celerity than this note. What were the words of the charm? That is a secret which shall never be known to the world. The only point which it much imports the public to know is probably already guessed, that the letter did not contain a refusal, nor any absolute discouragement of Ormond's hopes. But Lady Annalie and Florence had both distinctly told him that they could not receive him at Annalie till after a certain day, on which they said they should be particularly engaged. They told him that Colonel Albemarle was at Annalie, that he would leave it at such a time, and they requested that Mr. Ormond would postpone his visit till after that time. Not receiving this notice, Ormond had unfortunately gone upon the day that was specially prohibited. Now that the kneeling figure appeared to him as a rival in despair, not in triumph, Ormond asked himself how he could ever have been such an idiot as to doubt Florence Annalie. Why did I set off in such haste for Paris? Could not I have waited a day? Could not I have written again? Could I not have cross-questioned the drunken servant when he was sober? Could not I have done anything, in short, but what I did? Clearly as a man, when his anger is dissipated, sees what he ought to have done or to have left undone while the fury lasted, vividly as a man in a different kind of passion sees the folly of all he did, said, or thought when he was possessed by the past madness, so clearly, so vividly did Ormond now see and feel, and vehemently execrate his jealous folly and mad precipitation. And then he came to the question, could his folly be repaired? Would his madness ever be forgiven? Ormond in love affairs never had any presumption, any tinge of the Connell coxcombry in his nature. He was not apt to flatter himself that he had made a deep impression, and now he was, perhaps from his sense of the superior value of the object, more than usually diffident. Though Miss Annalie was still unmarried, she might have resolved irrevocably against him. though she was not a girl to act in the high-flown heroine style, and in a fit of pride or revenge to punish the man she liked by marrying his rival, whom she did not like, yet Florence Annerly, as Ormond well knew, inherited some of her mother's strength of character, and in circumstances that deeply touched her heart might be capable of all her mother's warmth of indignation. It was in her character decidedly to refuse to connect herself with any man, however her heart might incline towards him, if he had any essential defect of temper, or if she thought that his attachment to her was not steady and strong, such as she deserved it should be, and such as her sensibility and all her hopes of domestic happiness required in a husband. And then there was Lady Annerly to be considered. How indignant she would be at his conduct! While Ormond was travelling alone, he had full leisure to torment himself with these thoughts. Pressed forward alternately by hope and fear, each urging expedition, he hastened on, reached Dublin, crossed the water, and travelling day and night, lost not a moment till he was at the feet of his fair mistress. To those who like to know the how, the when, and the where, it should be told that it was evening when he arrived. Florence Annerly was walking with her mother by the seaside, in one of the most beautiful and retired parts of the coasts of Devonshire, when they were told by a servant that a gentleman from Ireland had just arrived at their house and wished to see them. A minute afterwards they saw. "Could it be?" Lady Annerly said, turning in doubt to her daughter; but the cheek of Florence instantly convinced the mother that it could be none but Mr. Ormond himself. "Mr. Ormond," said Lady Annerly, advancing kindly, yet with dignified reserve, "Mr. Ormond, after his long absence, is welcome to his old friend." There was in Ormond's look and manner, as he approached, something that much inclined the daughter to hope that he might prove not utterly unworthy of her mother's forgiveness; and when he spoke to the daughter, there was in his voice and look something that softened the mother's heart, and irresistibly inclined her to wish that he might be able to give a satisfactory explanation of his strange conduct. Where the parties are thus happily disposed both to hear reason, to excuse passion, and to pardon the errors to which passion, even in the most reasonable minds, is liable, explanations are seldom tedious or difficult to be comprehended. The moment Ormond produced the cover, the soiled cover of the letters, a glimpse of the truth struck Florence Annerly, and before he had got farther in his sentence than these words, "I did not receive your ladyship's letter till within these few days," all the reserve of Lady Annerly's manner was dispelled. Her smiles relieved his apprehensions, and encouraged him to proceed in his story with happy fluency. The carelessness of the drunken servant, who had occasioned so much mischief, was talked of for a few minutes with great satisfaction. Ormond took his own share of the blame so frankly and with so good a grace, and described with such truth the agony he had been thrown into by the sight of the kneeling figure in regimentals, that Lady Annerly could not help comforting him by the assurance that Florence had at the same moment been sufficiently alarmed by the rearing of his horse at the sight of the flapping window blind. "The kneeling gentleman," said Lady Annerly, "whom you thought at the height of joy and glory, was at that moment in the depths of despair. So ill do the passions see what is even before their eyes." If Lady Annerly had had a mind to moralize, she might have done so to any length, without fear of interruption from either of her auditors, and with the most perfect certainty of unqualified submission and dignified humility on the part of our hero, who was too happy at this moment not to be ready to acknowledge himself to have been wrong and absurd, and worthy of any quantity of reprehension or indignation that could have been bestowed upon him. Her ladyship went, however, as far from morality as possible, to Paris, She spoke of the success Mr. Ormond had had in Parisian society. She spoke of Monsieur and Madame de Connell, and various persons with whom he had been intimate, among others of the Abbé Morellet. Ormond rejoiced to find that Lady Annalee knew he had been in the Abbé Morellet's distinguished society. The happiest hopes for the future rose in his mind from perceiving that her ladyship, by whatever means, knew all that he had been doing in Paris. It seems that they had had accounts of him from several English travellers, who had met him at Paris, and had heard him spoken of in different companies. Ormond took care, give him credit for it, all who have ever been in love, even in these first moments, with the object of his present affection, Ormond took care to do justice to the absent Dora, whom he now never expected to see again. He seized, dexterously, an opportunity, in reply to something Lady Annalee said about the Connells, to observe that Madame de Connell was not only much admired for her beauty at Paris, but that she did honour to Ireland by having preserved her reputation. Young and without a guide as she was, in dissipated French society, with few examples of conjugal virtues to preserve in her mind the precepts and habits of her British education. He was glad of this opportunity to give, as he now did with all the energy of truth, the result of his feelings and reflections on what he had seen of the modes of living among the French, their superior pleasures of society, and their want of our domestic happiness. While Ormond was speaking, both the mother and daughter could not help admiring, in the midst of his moralizing, the great improvement which had been made in his appearance and manners. With all his own characteristic frankness, he acknowledged the impression which French gaiety and the brilliancy of Parisian society had at first made upon him. He was glad, however, that he had now seen all that the imagination often paints as far more delightful than it really is. He had, thank heaven, passed through this course of dissipation without losing his taste for better and happier modes of life. The last few months, though they might seem but a splendid or feverish dream in his existence, had in reality been, he believed, of essential service in confirming his principles, settling his character, and deciding for ever his taste and judgment, after full opportunity of comparison, in favour of his own country, and especially of his own countrywomen. Lady Annalee smiled benignantly, and after observing that this seemingly unlucky excursion, which had begun in anger, had ended advantageously to Mr. Ormond, and after having congratulated him upon having saved his fortune and established his character solidly, she left him to plead his own cause with her daughter, in her heart cordially wishing him success. What he said, or what Florence answered, we do not know, but we are perfectly sure that if we did, the repetition of it would tire the reader. Lady Annalee and tea waited for them with great patience to an unusually late, which they considered to be an unusually early hour. The result of this conversation was that Ormond remained with them in this beautiful retirement in Devonshire the next day, and the next, and how many days are not precisely recorded. A blank was left for the number, which the editor of these memoirs does not dare to fill up at random, lest some Mrs. Macruel should exclaim, "Scandalously too long to keep the young man there," or "Scandalously too short a courtship after all." It is humbly requested that every young lady of delicacy and feeling will put herself in the place of Florence Annalee. Then, imagining the man she most approves of to be in the place of Mr. Ormond, she will be pleased to fill up the blank with what number of days she may think proper. When the happy day was named, it was agreed that they should return to Ireland, to Annalee, and that their kind friend, Dr. Cambray, should be the person to complete that union which he had so long foreseen and so anxiously desired. Those who wish to hear something of estates, as well as of weddings, should be told that about the same time Ormond received letters from Marquis O'Shane and from Monsieur de Connell. Marcus informing him that the estate of Castle Hermitage was to be sold by the commissioners of bankrupts, and beseeching him to bid for it, that it might not be sold under value. Monsieur de Connell also besought his dear friend Mr. Ormond to take the Black Islands off his hands, for they encumbered him terribly. No wonder, living as he did at Paris, with his head at Versailles and his heart in a faro bank. Ormond could not oblige both the gentlemen, though they had each pressing reasons for getting rid speedily of their property, and were assured that he would be the most agreeable purchaser. Castle Hermitage was the finest estate, and by far the best bargain. But other considerations weighed with our hero. While Sir Ulic O'Shane's son and natural representative was living, banished by debts from his native country, Ormond could not bear to take possession of Castle Hermitage. For the Black Islands he had a fondness. They were associated with all the tender recollections of his generous benefactor. He should hurt no one's feelings by this purchase, and he might do a great deal of good by carrying on his old friend's improvements, and by farther civilizing the people of the islands, all of whom were warmly attached to him. They considered Prince Harry as the lawful representative of their dear King Corny, and actually offered up prayers for his coming again to reign over them. To those who think that the mind is a kingdom of yet more consequence than even that of the Black Islands, it may be agreeable to hear that Ormond continued to enjoy the empire which he had gained over himself, and to maintain that high character which, in spite of his neglected education and of all the adverse circumstances to which he was early exposed, he had formed for himself by resolute energy. Lady Annalee, with the pride of affection, gloried in the full accomplishment of her prophecies, and was rewarded in the best manner for that benevolent interest which she had early taken in our hero's improvement, by seeing the perfect felicity that subsisted between her daughter and Ormond. End of chapter 32. End of Ormond by Maria Edgeworth.